Hi friends, my name is Angela and welcome. Over the years, I've realised that I've built a reading system that allows me to choose books more intentionally, read more attentively, and perhaps something people don't often talk about is how I remember them long after I've finished. I read physical books, I annotate in pencil, I reflect in notebooks. But those things aren't really the point of my system, they're just the tools that I use. My overall goal with reading isn't to read the most books. It really is to become the kind of person who continues to grow through the books that I read. So today I want to walk you through my complete system, from how I choose what to read, how I protect my attention while I am reading, to what I do afterwards so I remember what I read and don't just finish one book and immediately go on to the next. Before I walk you through the system itself, I think it's important for me to share with you why I built it this way. And when I say I built it, it is definitely something that's happened organically, because the truth is that once I realized what I wanted my reading life to look and feel like, the system kind of built itself. I really never wanted to be someone who was optimizing my reading, but instead I wanted a way of reading that it forced me to slow down, to really pay attention, and to remember what I read long after I closed the books, and just to expand my horizons. And for me, keeping most of that system on paper is what works best. I do use technology, but really only when it is genuinely adding something useful. So I realized that if I wanted my reading to be immersive and quiet, then I needed to do things that would protect my attention. It's not about discipline, it's more about creating conditions that allow me to completely disappear into a book. And one of my favorite weekend rituals, which is becoming more frequent, is to start treating my phone like a landline. And I have started to develop some very strong feelings about being available 24/7 in today's age, but that's a totally different video. But I think that's what the whole system is about. Every part of it, how I choose books to how I reflect on them afterwards, is designed to reduce noise and make room for attention. So let's start at the beginning about how a book enters my life. I really do think that a quiet reading life starts before you even open the book. It really starts with choosing what to read next. And I have shared about that when I talk about slow reading, about how an anticipation to read a book is part of that slow reading process. And one of the things I've learned is that I really do enjoy anticipating reading a book almost as much as I enjoy reading the book. But if I choose intentionally rather than just picking up a book at random, I can really give that book my full attention and get the most out of it. I do mood read a lot, which is to say that I tend to pick books that are based on my energy levels and what I'm in the mood to read about. Sometimes that means jumping between genres or reading multiple books at once, or even stepping away and putting down a book if I feel I'm not connecting with it. I love having my book options physically in front of me because I think I'm able to try and remember what it was that excited me at first about the book. So I check in with these shelves, which is my TBR, whenever I'm looking for something new to read. I might choose a book because it has a topic that I'm interested in, an author that I want to read again or for the first time. Or it could be an idea for a future video. For example, I had an idea about a future video about Australian historical fiction where the landscape becomes a character in the book. So for that reason, I deliberately prioritised a few Australian historical fiction books over the summer. I really don't want to recommend books that I haven't actually read myself. It was kind of a rule I set for myself about 6 months into my YouTube journey, because I want my recommendations to you to come more from my experience rather than just assumption. I recently did some big updates to my TBR, which I think are going to be a game changer for me. Essentially, I created categories within my TBR that are not genres. For example, one of the categories are books that I see as being core to my reading identity. These books represent the reader I want to become. They're not necessarily going to be my favorite books. I don't think they're going to be the books that I will read next, but they are books that embody the themes and topics that have consistently come up in the books that I love or have been real cornerstones for me in my life and my reading life. Another category or another shelf are books that are on my mind, books that have a bit of momentum in my life. And that could be books that are currently being talked about in the book world or connected to current interests or thoughts of my own. And then there are some more groupings which are like books that are deferred, books that I really want to trial a little bit before I commit to them, perhaps even a seasonal TBR that I've built. And the seasonal TBRs I see them more as a mood board for the season I want to have rather than a prescribed reading list. But that said, there are times when my reading is a little more structured and I do need to pick up books that are currently on my Freedom After the Fall reading curriculum, which is where I'm reading Paradise Lost by John Milton and also reading some companion books that pick up themes in that book. So those books are always close by and ready to pick up based on the curriculum. And honestly, at some times, the books on my shelves are not catching my attention at all. And that's usually because perhaps the book I had just finished, I really want to linger on a little bit more. I feel like I need a bit of space before I pick up another story. So in that case, I will generally pick up maybe something to reread or a short story, something like that. Or I may not choose anything at all, which is completely fine. But once I have chosen a book, I really do try and step away and call it a day. I do not want to feel like I am flicking through Netflix looking for another movie to watch and next thing I know it's been 30 minutes and I've only watched previews. I want to be decisive and I want to trust my instinct, which is the name of the game. So once I have that book, I am going to give it my full attention. However, attentiveness, I don't think it's something that happens by accident. Sometimes I need to create the conditions for it. And I think that is one of the reasons why my reading life is generally offline. Not because I am anti-technology, but because I know how my attention can drift if I am near technology. So I make sure to have my phone out of reach before I start reading. It really is about removing the temptation before it even begins. Because I am exactly that sort of person who will watch a film while simultaneously looking up trivia about it. So when I'm reading a book, sometimes I might stop halfway through a chapter because I want to look up that author that was referenced or a book that was talked about, or just get into what other books this author may have wrote. So keeping my phone away from me avoids me going down those rabbit holes. During the week, most of my reading happens when I'm commuting to and from work on the train or when I am winding down for the evening, getting ready for bed. On weekends, it's a little bit of a slower pace where I might spend a bit more time with a coffee in my reading chair. I do like to pay attention to the atmosphere at times, not all the time, but sometimes it's nice to romanticize what you're doing, and that may be lighting a candle, having a lovely drink with you, putting on some lovely music, or just sitting by a window and feeling the breeze. None of these things are essential, but I think they kind of lull me into this moment where I'm going to begin to settle into a book. One thing I do want to mention is that I don't try and fit reading into or around the distractions or responsibilities that are in my life. Most of my reading isn't on a time frame, and instead, such as 5 minutes while the pasta boils or 10 minutes before I have to leave the house. But instead, I've tried to shape my environment so reading is the easiest thing for me to default to. I have books everywhere. Within constraints, I have them everywhere. Books on my bedside table, books in my bag, books on the coffee table, next to my reading chair. They are visual reminders that I can jump back into reading at any time, and I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why I love physical books so much. They just feel a little more immersive for me, and the fact that they are tangible creates these little visual cues. Physical books just invite a different kind of attention, and how I mark pages depends on the book. If it's a Joan Didion paperback, I will probably dog-ear it, but if it's a collectible, cloth-bound classic, I'll probably use some sort of annotation tab to be able to mark the page without actually marking the page. But I almost always read with a pencil nearby. I'll underline things that move me, circle words that maybe are repeating. I'll write questions or have reactions in the margins, and occasionally tab passages that I want to come back to. When I read The Crucible by Arthur Miller, that's a play, and I marked that up to within an inch of its life. Some books just really feel like they create a conversation within you. And that's what annotation is to me. I'm not writing a thesis about these books. I'm staying in conversation with it and simply creating a bit of a log around my thoughts instead of simply passing through. And annotating digitally just doesn't have the same feeling, and I think it's because there is a few blockages before you can get back into it. I also find handwriting is just a little more engaging, which is what I want. I want to engage and live in these books. So the only digital part of this reading process really is that I do use Storygraph to start and finish books. So it's creating a log of the books that I have read. I've become a lot more relaxed around it lately, where I may not log it in Storygraph the exact time I start it, but I enjoy looking back over my year of reading, seeing patterns that have emerged, the months that were high reading months or the kind of genres that I really found myself going for. It's simply a record of the journey, not the experience itself. So by the time I've finished a book, I've generally lived with it for a number of days, perhaps a number of weeks. I've underlined passages. I've really protected my time when reading, so I am really immersed in the book. But finishing a book is not the end of the reading journey. In many ways, it's where the important part of this reading process begins. I really feel that Storygraph is that record-keeping process. It tells me that I read a book, but my reading notebook and my commonplace book tell me why it mattered that I read the book. I usually try and write down my reflections on a book within a day of finishing it. I've learned that if I move straight into another novel, I probably won't come back and write those reflections down, so I try and do it then and there, while everything is still fresh in my mind. I do have a standard set, like there is a bit of a pro forma that I follow for each book that I note, but essentially I write the key information, maybe the really big things that mattered to me about the book, and what I actually thought about it before I start the next book. And my reading notebook and my commonplace book have two very different jobs. So my reading notebook, which is within this little folio, my reading notebook is capturing my response to a book. It's not long, it's not complicated, I stick to one page, whereas my commonplace book captures the passages that continue to speak to me long after I have finished the book. While I like to reflect in my reading notebook as soon as possible, when it comes to my commonplace book, I like to have as much distance as possible from the time I read the book to when I've actually put the details into this one. So I tend to put my completed books on the sideboard, on my desk, and I just have them there in a pile until I'm ready to go through and transfer information. I just sit down with them, flip through them one by one, look at my notes, look at the annotations, and see if there is anything that is still speaking to me that I want to capture in my commonplace. Sometimes I'll come back to a book and months later, that thing that I noted, it just doesn't resonate with me anymore as much as I felt it in the moment when I read it. And other times, a sentence I barely read the first time around hits harder the next time I see it. But if a passage is still resonating a long time after I've read it, it's usually a sign that I want to record it in my commonplace book. It is not something I do every week or every month. I just do it when I feel the need to do it, but I know it's something that future Ange will appreciate because I can just flip through this book and just see, it's like a record of the things that mattered to me at that moment. I think it's also important to note that I try and make these things a ritual. I have a beautiful notebook. I recently bought a new fountain pen. This is a Kaweco fountain pen, and I bought it as like a bit of a birthday present for myself. But I got it with brown ink, and it has elevated the experience of writing these notes down to another level. Writing by hand, I think, really encourages you to remember things. So I try and make sure I use beautiful things that make me want to come back to it. But I also may light a candle or have some music on in the background, but the tools aren't really the point. The point is that these rituals and these tools are really helping me form a habit of asking me to spend longer with an idea or with a book before moving on to the next one. And that is something I really want to protect. And I think this process of whether it is commonplacing or journaling, those are some of the things that help me to remember books a lot better. Quite often I have people comment that my memory is really, really good with books, and my memory is not good. I still look for the remote while the remote is in my hand. But when it comes to books, I've just spent more time with these words. I read them, I underlined them, I may have shared them with someone. I've then written them down in my own hand. But by the time I've done all those things, there's been several opportunities for these words to become a part of me. So when I look back over my year of reading, I don't just see a list of books that I've read. I see the ideas that I've wrestled with, the passages that really spoke to me, and the books that quietly changed the way I think. So what does all this actually look like in real life? One thing I like about this system, as I call it, is that it doesn't require a lot of time. It just fits into the rhythms of my life that I already have happening. Reading still feels like a luxury to me. It's akin to drawing a bath or having a nap in the afternoon. Sometimes I may only read 30 minutes before bed or 10 minutes on the train, but sometimes it's an hour-long immersive reading session with my dog next to me and a cup of coffee nearby. And these moments never feel routine. They feel like real pockets of borrowed time. Perhaps most importantly, where it's really showed up in everyday life is when I'm in a moment when I feel the need to pick up my phone and just scroll. That is when I instead pick up a book. On the train, at home with a cup of tea, sometimes if I'm in line for something. I can't tell you how many books I've read while I was at kids' sport carnivals. And last summer, when we had a little bit of an island break, every time the group we were with ultimately pulled out their phones to connect and scroll, I instead pulled out my book, and it felt incredibly subversive to do that, in the best possible way. My bedside table is where I put the books that I want to end the day with. Currently, I have Mary Oliver's Devotions and Night Swimmers. My reading chair is different, and that's where I tend to keep the more denser books, the non-fiction books, the books I want to spend more concentrated time with. Perhaps most importantly is that at each of these locations where I read a book, I have all the tools available to annotate whenever I want to. I've learned that if I have to get up and go get a pencil, then I'll start to get distracted by other things, so it's important that I have these things nearby. I'm not really working towards page goals or book goals anymore. I'm simply trying to make reading be the easiest choice whenever I have a pocket of time. I do want to say that this reading process, system, habits have developed over time. What I'm doing now looks very different to when I had young children in the house. Sometimes there is friction, and I have to really force myself to sit down and write down my thoughts on a book, or even pick up a book in the first place. But when I look back over the books I've read, there were times in my life where I spent more time thinking about what I was going to read than I did actually in the reading itself. But now books feel really connected. One book leads to another. Quotes resurface later, ideas find their ways into conversations, into these videos, and into how I think. I guess I don't feel like I am consuming books anymore. I really am having an ongoing conversation and living with them. And I think that's something I've been reflecting on more and more. A good system, a reading system that really works, shouldn't just help me finish more books. I think it should really help these books change me. And reading this way has slowed me down. It has made me more attentive in so many other facets of my life. I retain more of what I read. I feel less pressure to keep up with others. And I spend far less time comparing my reading life, the books I've read, to other people's journeys. And more than anything, reading really does feel like a luxury again. So I don't read the most books, and in fact, I'm reading less at the moment than I have for the last couple of years. But I'm okay with that. I expect my process will change as I change, as the years go by. I think it's really helped me stay with the books for longer, and I think that's far more valuable for me at this moment than a list of how many books that I read in the year. If you'd like to see one part of this system in more detail, I do have a little video explaining what a commonplace book is and how I commonplace, so I'll leave a link to that here. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found this interesting, and have a wonderful week of reading ahead, and I will speak with you soon. Bye.